I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Emmy winner Billy Crudup, who just received his second nomination for playing Cory Ellison on the second season of The Morning Show. Billy, congratulations on your nomination. How does it feel to be welcome back a second time?
Thanks very much. It's really nice. The Carrie Aaron, who wrote that character. It's just the gift that keeps on giving. Getting to play somebody that extravagant in a show with that kind of ambitions has already exceeded my expectations for almost any project. So to have people watch it and recognize it too, it is a great honor.
Yeah, and I was very surprised to read that The Morning Show season two actually marks the first time you did a second season of a TV show. So, on a more general note, before we dive into Cory's storyline, what was that experience like of re-inhabiting a character and getting to build on the foundation you had already laid in season one?
It was bonkers. I had never committed to something where I haven't read the entirety of the story before. So, and it's happening again right now as we're getting prepared for the third season,
right?
Where I'm reading scripts, having never imagined the character in these kinds of circumstances. So it's a fantastic opportunity for me creatively to learn a new skill set, which is not closing the chapter on a character who is in progress, and it's a little unnerving. I like to feel more in control of the storytelling as a whole, but it's really exhilarating to see new writers take on a character with a different perspective, and so I'm looking forward to it. But certainly last season, as Carrie was planting the seeds at the beginning of the number of things that were potentially going to be obstacles to Cory's well-being throughout the course of the season, only having it alluded to and not being able to see it in print is a really strange experience. And she dropped some interesting bombs about the complicity that or that he was complicit with Fred in making a pact that he was worried other people would consider, and that the feelings for Bradley were beginning to become overwhelming for him to think in his typical versatile and extravagant way. And so getting to respond to a character who's so cerebral in an emotional way, in a way that he doesn't have all the language for, was really quite interesting. But yeah, the process of doing it again, and it's very, very, very new. Still very new.
I can imagine. And, you sort of touched on this, but what I really liked about this season is that after Cory's such an elusive and, in my opinion, quite an emotionally closed-off character in season one, we learned more about his motivations and get to see his outer shell crack a bit in season two. So what was it about the premiere in particular, titled My Least Favorite Year, that made you want to enter it as your Emmy episode submission?
I ran out of time. They said I had to do something really fast, and I didn't have good internet. And I thought I think I talked a lot in episode one. We should probably go with that. I reached out to Mimi, and yeah, I wish I could say that there was a more thorough process, but it was there wasn't a whole lot of time given. And there are actually several points throughout the season that I thought were really well written, and and we executed a different side to the character that I thought was fairly fascinating when he goes to plead with Hannah's father.
Yes.
It's a different kind of bargaining for Cory, where he doesn't generally find himself in a position where he's out of his league. And with somebody who is so emotional and kind of trapped in their own story and unempathetic in a way that Cory had maybe predicted, you see him not just lose it in the way that he loses it to the board with indignance at the beginning, where he's like, you guys are just fucking idiots. I mean, I'm sorry you're so dumb. I'm sorry for the world. This was a scenario where all he could do was mourn for Hannah, who didn't have a father. That is an agony that Cory could relate to, and you don't know that much about it. You just get to see him try to empathize with somebody who is unreachable. And so that moment I thought was a really, really interesting one, when it dawns on him that this guy is not reachable and was not really present in a way for Hannah. And then when he describes to Stella how you better check your feelings at the door, that to me was a great reemergence of a very familiar Cory. And then obviously declaring his love for Bradley after undermining her so hideously was a fascinating. You have to be very compartmentalized to not quite understand the depth of it. I think he's going to tell, what he wants to do is tell her that he was the one responsible for outing her, and he's haunted by that, because it was a horrible thing to do, whatever his justifications were. And what ends up coming out is that he loves her unexpectedly. And that was a really interesting piece of writing, I thought. Carrie had to keep reminding me, you're telling her, you're confessing to her, because it's terrible, and you have to, that's all you're thinking about, and the other one is just the surprise. And so there were a lot of great and interesting things to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of build on that, what I think the premiere does so well is lay the foundation for everything that you already talked about, lay the foundation for his entire season 2 arc. And what I really think is interesting is this dichotomy between Cory, the CEO, and Cory, the human being, that this season really establishes.
I think he's going to quickly go back to being the CEO. I think being a human being he was not a fan.
Yeah, exactly, right? Because we see that he really struggles with maintaining all other aspects of his life because he's so immersed in one of them. So how did you approach playing these two different sides, so Cory the CEO and Cory the human being, in season 2?
Well, it's precisely that. I mean, because he lives such an internal life, his mind is constantly in motion. And if you can imagine someone who is looking at a chessboard, and they're predicting the way in which the entire thing will play out, like great chess players do, each move they're calculating, 10 moves ahead, 20 moves ahead, trying to figure out how it's going to play out. That's how Cory manages social situations. So if you can imagine somebody who is focused on chess, their mind is working towards chess, they're looking at a board, but they've got a toddler who's grabbing them by the shirt going, I'm hungry, Dad. The mind isn't capable of processing the same level of strategy. So what's happening internally is, why isn't my mind working for this? Hold on. Why isn't my mind working? Oh, wait a second. I need to take care of this. Wait, what's happening over here? So there's a similar kind of internal gymnastics, but it's attending to an emotional part of him, which is something he doesn't come easily. So there's not the same level of joy that is typically attached to him thinking his way through a situation. And I definitely told Carrie, I was like, please stop torturing Cory. He was so much fun to play before, and now it's exhausting. But she definitely had to rake him over the coals for a while.
Oh, she certainly did. And you know that in early season one, he briefly talks about his youth or his childhood and how he, and I'm quoting him here, vowed to own the world one day and kick everyone's ass into submission. How early do you think that drive, or how early do you think that drive existed, and where do you think it came from ultimately?
12. And I think it was the realization that his mother, no matter how hard she worked, was constantly being undermined by men in positions of power that diminished her. And I think he had an awareness. He has a pretty strong intellect of her own capability and capacity. And I think he saw the extent to which she was hamstrung, and the absence of a positive role model, male role model for him. I think, particularly in terms of father, we don't learn anything about him in on screen. So we sort of created our own narrative, and he's not a strong presence in his life or in Cory's mind, and so there is an adolescent defense that I think erupts in him. And he was probably, not fully capable of bullying somebody physically. And so the way that he could undermine people in positions of power is to outthink them and out strategize them. And that's where this instinct to not just take over the world, but beat everyone into submission. I mean, I think that's, what he is really, that sort of mentality is is there's a vengeance, attached to that. It's not just aspiration. It's not just ambition. It's vengeful. And I suspect that arose in him in defense of his mom.
Hmm. That's very interesting. And, to sort of build on that, what's interesting about the dichotomy that we were talking about is that it really shows in the way he articulates himself as well. When he's in CEO mode, he speaks in a very theatrical, almost rehearsed way, while in more intimate moments, like the ones with Bradley, he kind of beats around the bush as he struggles to convey his feelings. So talk a little bit about some of the discussions you and Carrie Aaron, the showrunner for seasons 1 and 2, had when it came to the versatility of Cory's language.
Terrific question. It is all rehearsed in his mind, not in a dramatic way, but in the way that you think through a chess game. I know that A plus B is going to equal C. So if I know I'm going into the room with these three people, what are the ways in which what are the potential outcomes? So no matter what happens, he has a speech prepared. He's got analogies that live in his mind. He thinks in metaphor, and he's constantly trying to invite people into his imagination and win them over by the strength and the charm of his argument. So when he goes home at night, I would say, well before Bradley came into the picture, all he could think about is how to win the next day with the number of people that he was going to encounter, how he was going to make sure to be the one who is left in a greater position of power at the end of the day, at the end of every day. I think that's the way he sort of thinks about life, and he focuses all of that on his work. And so when he gets to the UBA, there's no encounter that he's not prepared for, because I think he spends all of his time like sort of a monk, figuring out how to take over the world and beat everybody into submission. And so consequently, those that sort of language is always right there for him in a very easy way. When this monster appears inside of him called like affection or adoration or love for somebody else, this is a disruptive internal character, and one that he is never really been attendant to. And I suspect that all of the intimate relationships in his life have lacked some level of interpersonal candor. I suspect they're mostly physical and utilitarian in a way. That his capacity to be vulnerable with people is just not familiar to him. He's so dead set on his ambitions. And so the only way to navigate that interpersonally is stumble through an idea, because it's something he hasn't rehearsed, didn't expect to have to talk to Bradley while his heart is pounding, or watch her and Laura come together while he's seething with bitterness and rejection, and the none of those things I think were could he predict. So Cory, I think, did a very shrewd job of making him stumble through that in as clumsy a way as possible, when he can still be super shrewd with business once he compartmentalizes himself.
Absolutely. And I think we see that especially when he confesses his love to Bradley in the finale. You see how he can't really find the words, and he talks a while before he actually gets to the point. So I think that's really fascinating. And on a final note, you obviously have a ton of monologues on this show, including, right at the beginning of your submission, in which you have to talk at 100 miles per hour and say the most outrageous things. So how do you go about preparing for scenes like that to achieve, the required pace and level of energy on the day?
It's pretty boring. You say the words a lot. You find out what the thought is, and
Mhm.
the thing about Cory is he thinks in paragraphs. Most of us think in sentences and maybe even words. And the idea of thinking in a long format way, knowing where you're going and knowing that you've got to hit several points along the way to ensure that the end message is received with the level of effectiveness that it's meant. He needs to always present to people that the ideas are thoroughly thought through, because they are. And whether they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. He's going to win the argument by the force of the work that he's put into thinking about it. So consequently, when I get those, I have to start with the idea first, to try to understand why he's using so much language for a specific reason. Once I start to understand what the idea is, that gives me an indication of the speed at which I'll have to deliver it, the circumstances, how much that person is willing to tolerate me talking, those kinds of things. Because some people are willing to, like, characters that occupy a lower status to him, they're forced to comply so he can take longer with an idea. People who want to get up and leave and are not so interested in hearing a monologue, like Bradley or Alex or Chip even too, that he's got to get it out a little bit faster and make sure to keep their attention. And so you actually just have to work the muscles in your mouth to be able to say the words fast. So that takes time. And there's a lot of acting exercises that I employ to make sure that my mouth can move that fast.
Well,
Pretty boring.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting. And my God, thinking in paragraphs sounds extremely exhausting for a human being. My goodness.
Playing Cory is a sweaty job. I'm typically extremely gratified and very tired at the end of some of these days.
Oh, I can absolutely imagine. Billy, again, congratulations on your Emmy nomination, and
Thank
thank you
you.
so much for taking the time to speak to Gold Derby today. It was such a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.